Hi, I'm Dr. Laura Wilson, the Curator of Paleontology at the Sternberg Museum of Natural History. Thank you for joining us today for a new way to museum. So this is going to be part one of a five-part series that I'm going to be doing, talking about my 5 favorite facts about dinosaurs. So for fact number 1, we're going to talk about birds are dinosaurs and what we actually mean by that. So my 5 favorite fact about dinosaurs, fact 1, is birds are dinosaurs. So when we say birds are dinosaurs, this really comes down to how we as scientists think about evolutionary relationships and how we view birds in terms of their long geologic history and evolutionary relationships going back 233 million years ago. So by this, it's all thinking about who's related to whom, who is more closely related to whom, and how we know that they're related to each other to begin with. So this image to the one on my left is called a cladogram, or a phylogeny, or a phylogenetic tree, all different words for very similar things. And what it is it is a pictorial representation of evolutionary relationships. And so what it's showing is who is more closely related to whom and what characteristics we're using to determine how they're related and how closely they're related. So if something like this in this image is overwhelming and you're not really sure how to break it down, then let's talk about it in a little bit more detail. And what I'm actually going to do is talk about it kind of like a family tree. So evolutionary relationships are kind of like a family tree. And this is not a perfect analogy, but it's not that far off either, because families share genetic material from one generation to the other that then determine the physical characteristics of those organisms. And this is exactly what we're tracing on an evolutionary tree. So how animals are physically and genetically similar actually informs us about how they are related to each other evolutionarily. So we kind of think about evolutionary relationships like a family tree. And so the same way that your family tree shows relatedness among siblings and cousins and various living and dead relatives, cladograms show evolutionary relationships among living and extinct organisms. So I've used my fantastic artistic talent to reconstruct my family tree. And so here is me. And here is my vast artistic talent, which peaked with really poorly articulated stick figures. So me on my family tree, and I have a brother. So I have one sibling. So my brother and I are very closely related to each other because we share the most recent common ancestor of our parents. So my brother's and mine's most recent common ancestor are our parents. So my mom, though, also has a brother who is, of course, my uncle. And my uncle has 2 children, or he has 3 children. Sorry, cousin number 3, I left you off my tree. Has cousins, so has children who are then my cousins. And we are, of course, linked to each other through our grandparents. So my brother and I, our most recent common ancestor is actually just 1 generation back at my parents. My cousin and I are closely related, but we have to go back 2 generations to get to our most recent common ancestor, which is our grandparents. So I am more closely related to my brother than either of us are to our cousins. And I might look like a cousin and my brother might look like a cousin, but my brother and I share more genetic material with each other and so have more similarities to each other than either of us do to our cousins. And so we can then take this back to our dinosaur family tree. So this is a slightly different version than the one I showed earlier, and this is really just a more generalized version. And so there are 3 big groups of dinosaurs: the theropods, the sauropods, and then the ornithischians. And theropods and sauropods are actually grouped together within the saurischians. So this might be terms that you've heard before. Ornithischians are a lot of our horned dinosaurs like Triceratops, and duck-billed dinosaurs like hadrosaurs, and armored dinosaurs like stegosaurs or ankylosaurs. Then our sauropods and theropods are within our saurischians. And so the sauropods are the long-necked dinosaurs, and theropods are the two-legged, mostly meat-eating, but not all, because, there's dinosaurs, but mostly meat-eating dinosaurs. And so if we look at each other, we can then put this very similar to a family tree. And so what we look at these branches, which show kind of different evolutionary trajectories. And then where they meet up at a common ancestor. So theropods and sauropods share a common ancestor with this saurischian. And then saurischians and ornithischians share a common ancestor in this guy, which is what we would call the first dinosaur, or the most recent common ancestor of all dinosaurs. And so we can then look at this again in terms of a family relationship. So theropods and sauropods are more closely related to each other than they are to any of the ornithischians. And that's because theropods and sauropods share a more recent common ancestor. So in an evolutionary tree, in a family tree perspective, theropods and sauropods are siblings. And then the ornithischian is the cousin. And in fact, scientists would call a theropoda and sauropoda sister taxa, showing that they are closely related. So we can now go to our more detailed look at a dinosaur family tree that we saw before. And this is the side of the family tree that really just focuses on the theropod dinosaurs. So those mostly meat-eating two-legged dinosaurs. And we can trace birds using this tree back to great-grandpa dinosaur. So we have at the top of the tree our original dinosaur. So this is the common ancestor of all dinosaurs, or the first dinosaurs. And so this is going to then include the ornithischians and then the saurischians, which is everything else on the tree. So saurischians is marked by this branching point, which is then going to separate the sauropods, those long-necked dinosaurs, with all of our theropods, our two-legged, mostly meat-eating dinosaurs. So then we have our branching, our ancestor that is common to all of our theropod dinosaurs. And if we move further and further down to the tree, we'll see some familiar names like allosaurs and tyrannosaurs and maybe some dromaeosaurs, which include things like velociraptor, all those famous Jurassic Park dinosaurs or Jurassic World dinosaurs. And then as we get closer to the bottom of the tree, we eventually get to our birds. And so if we read this from bottom to top, we see that there's kind of this nesting family relationships. So birds are theropods, and theropods are saurischians, and saurischians are dinosaurs. So we then have that birds are dinosaurs. And so this is the same we can look at these same relationships for all different types of groups of animals. And so the same way that we say a bird is a dinosaur is the same way that we would say a cat is a type of mammal. So mammals are a group of animals that include a lot of different types of things, and a cat is just one of them. Well, the dinosaur is a group of animals that include a lot of different types of animals, and a bird is just one of those types. And so one of the things that paleontologists and other evolutionary biologists use to make things a little bit easier is to talk about avian dinosaurs. So those dinosaurs that are birds. So like our hawks and our shorebirds and our seabirds and our ducks and things like that. And then we have our non-avian dinosaurs. And so our T-Rexes and our Triceratops and our Apatosaurs and things like that. And so this just really helps us differentiate when we use the word dinosaur, whether we're including birds within that or not. And it also reminds us that when we study and think about birds, it's important to remember their evolutionary history as dinosaurs. So we can then go back and look at these evolutionary relationships. And so yes, this tree is showing who's more closely related to whom, but it also provides other information about how we know that. So evolutionary relationships are determined by comparing the anatomy, the skeleton of different types of, in this case, dinosaurs. So by comparing the skeletons of different dinosaurs, we can formulate hypotheses or educated guesses about who is more closely related to whom. So those dinosaurs that are more similar to each other typically, not always, but typically have more in common with each other. And scientists determine relatedness, so how closely related things are, not only by looking at the number of characters shared by different types of dinosaurs, but also looking at unique characters that are shared by just a few types of animals. And these are unique derived characters. And so when we see animals that share these unique characters, we then assume that they inherited them from a common ancestor. So if you and your sibling have red hair, there's a good chance that you inherited that red hair from one of your common ancestors. And so we do this on a much larger scale within evolutionary relationships. So just like people in the same family share a lot of characteristics, dinosaurs in the same group share a lot of characteristics as well. And it really comes down to closely related organisms have more similar genes, which then determine physical characteristics. So you and your sibling have more genes in common than you and your cousins. And so that's why you and your sibling are probably more resemble each other more than you and your cousins. And it's the same thing when we look at cladograms. We see what characteristics are unique to some groups of dinosaurs. So if we look at our saurischians at the top of our tree over here, we can then see that one of the things that's linking all saurischians together is a four-fingered hand. And so both the sauropods and the theropods would have inherited four fingers from a common ancestor. Moving down the tree to theropods, we see the same thing, is that theropods share hollow bones and a furcula. And so a furcula is actually the wishbone or the fused clavicles of a bird, or sorry, in this case, of a theropod dinosaur. And so all theropods have this, and they would have inherited this from that first theropod that is the most recent common ancestor of all different theropod dinosaurs. And then as we move down the tree, we get down to birds, which are linked on this pictorial representation by long arms. So birds are unique in terms of evolving wings and flight, and they do this with really long arms. So they actually have a lower arm bone that is longer than their upper leg bone, which is one of the characteristics that's linking all of these birds together. Another cool thing that's on this tree is at the very top and is actually showing geologic time. And so it's showing the timing of these different evolutionary events. And so we would have had something like our first dinosaurs actually evolving about 233 million years ago, all the way down to our first birds evolving about 150 million years ago. And all of these are plotted with their characteristics and these evolutionary relationships within the context of geologic time. So we put a lot of information into forming these cladograms, which then give us a lot of information back about not only how things are related, but how we know. So what characters are being used to determine who's related to whom. So now that we've talked a little bit about what is a dinosaur and how we know, let's talk about what isn't a dinosaur, because there are a lot of misconceptions out there. So if we take a typical ecosystem of the age of dinosaurs, we see a lot of different types of animals, many of which are not around today. And so yes, we do see dinosaurs. So we have dinosaurs all the way on the far side of the image living on land. But we see a lot of things that aren't dinosaurs. So one of the more common misconceptions is pterosaurs. So pterosaurs are reptiles, and they are flying reptiles, but they are not dinosaurs. If you want to talk about a flying dinosaur, you better be talking about a bird. Other things that are not dinosaurs are alligators and crocodiles. They are reptiles and they are related to dinosaurs, but they are not dinosaurs. Likewise, marine reptiles, so mosasaurs and plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs are all different types of reptiles, and they're different types of lizards, but they are not dinosaurs. So if you're talking about a swimming dinosaur, then the debate's still out about Spinosaurus, but typically you better be talking about some sort of marine bird that's swimming underwater, like a penguin. And the last thing on this picture, which may seem obvious, is turtles. Turtles are not dinosaurs. I'm not gonna lie, we don't really know what turtles are, but we have a pretty good idea that they are not dinosaurs. And we can look at this on an evolutionary tree of reptiles. So we go back to our common ancestor of all reptiles, and we see that things like dinosaurs, highlighted in the box, and turtles and crocodilians and pterosaurs, they're all types of reptiles, but they are not dinosaurs. And so they share a common ancestor, but that common ancestor does not include the first dinosaurs. And then our last big misconception about what isn't a dinosaur is our good friend Dimetrodon, or Dimetrodon, I've heard it both ways, which is not a dinosaur. So a lot of these big sail-backed and honestly reptile-looking things are actually not even closely related to dinosaurs. They are, in fact, if we look at their evolutionary family tree, more closely related to mammals than they are to dinosaurs. So dinosaurs are reptiles up here. And then we have our Dimetrodon, which is in this group called synapsids. And synapsids include the mammals. So a Dimetrodon is actually more closely related to a mammal than they are to a reptile. And so we know this because Dimetrodon and mammals share a more recent common ancestor with each other than any of them do with a reptile or dinosaur. So now that we all understand that birds are in fact dinosaurs, next time you look out your window and you see the little birds going about their little bird business, you can just think about them as little dinosaurs who have enjoyed 233 million years of evolutionary history. So thank you for joining us for an episode of the Sternberg Museum's A New Way to Museum. Leave any questions you may have in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for joining us in A New Way to Museum with the Sternberg Museum of Natural History. If you enjoyed this video, like it and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell for notifications when we release a new video. Support us on Patreon for early access and exclusive content. You can also follow us on all our social media. Links are found in the description. Thanks for watching, and follow your curiosity to new discoveries.